An introduction to GST. Adjustments. When you're registered for GST, it's important to know when an adjustment is needed and how it's calculated. Adjustments are needed for GST when an expense is partly business and partly private. We're going to cover 3 situations: how to claim GST on business assets you owned before you registered for GST, how to claim GST on assets purchased after you registered for GST and that are also used privately, and 2 common examples of adjustments: a home office and motor vehicles.
Firstly, we'll discuss how to claim GST on assets used in your business that you owned before you registered for GST. You're able to claim a portion of the GST based on the percentage of time the asset's been used for GST purposes. For example, if you've owned an asset for 2 years in total and it's been used for GST purposes for 6 months, then you'll be able to claim 25% of the GST. To calculate your GST claim, you'll need the following details: the original date you purchased the asset, the original price you paid, the date you registered for GST, and the percentage of business use of the asset, which could be 100%. The GST claims for these assets is made at the end of the tax year, not when you register for GST. For most businesses, that means the GST adjustment is included in your GST return for the period ending 31 March. Here's a typical example of an adjustment for a business vehicle. The vehicle was bought in April 2023. We paid $13,800 and we registered for GST in October 2024. The car has been used in the business since then. We've kept a logbook which shows the car has used 60% of the kilometres travelled for business and 40% privately. We're making the GST claim in the GST return for March 2025. Here's how the calculation works. First, we need to work out the portion of time the car's been used for GST purposes or for taxable supplies. As at 31 March, we've owned the car for 24 months, and it's been used for GST purposes for a total of 6 months. This means the car's been used for taxable supplies for 25% of the time we've owned it. Step 2 is the portion of business use. Our logbook shows that 60% of the kilometres travelled are for business. At step 3, we calculate the GST on the original purchase price. To do this, we multiply the purchase price of $13,800 by 3 and then divide by 23. The answer we get is $1,800. So our calculation is 25% times 60% times $1,800 of GST, and the answer is $270. So $270 is our credit adjustment for our March 2025 GST return. If this seems a little complex, your tax agent can do this calculation for you, or you can contact us for assistance. There's further info and examples on our website if you search GST adjustments. The important thing to be aware is that an adjustment needs to be made in these circumstances. Now we'll look at how to calculate the GST claim for assets we purchase after our GST registration date. If the asset is $10,000 or less, excluding GST, but not principally used for business, we cannot claim any GST. For assets over $10,000 that aren't used 100% for business, we can't claim 100% of the GST. First, we estimate how much business use there'll be. Then, work out the GST on the purchase price. Next, multiply the GST by the estimated business use. The answer is your credit adjustment. Claim this GST figure as a credit adjustment in your GST return. We make this claim in the GST return where we purchase the asset. We must also have the required taxable supply information when we make the claim. The information may be contained in receipts, invoices, or other documents. Note: you'll need to keep records of the actual business use. For a car, this could be a 90-day logbook if this is reflective of your typical use. If the purchase price of your asset is over $10,000, you need to review your claim at the end of the tax year. Compare your estimate with the actual use, and if there's a difference between the two figures, you may need to make a further adjustment to balance the difference. Our website has the details regarding how often you must review your claim and if this extra adjustment is required. Keep in mind the associated persons rule, which may limit your GST claim or reduce it to zero. Now we'll look at how to claim GST for a home office. You'll need to measure the floor space of the home and the space that's being used for business. Divide the home area by the office area to calculate the home office percentage. You then claim this percentage of the costs relating to the home, and some of these costs have GST. In our example, the floor space for the home is 100 square metres, and we use 6 square metres for business. This gives us a home office percentage of 6%. The business owner can claim 6% of the power, rates, and insurances in their GST return. Most business owners claim the GST for their home office at the end of the tax year. For most businesses, this would be the GST return for the period ending 31 March. A logbook is a good way to work out how much of your vehicle expenses and GST you can claim. You can claim the GST on expenses such as fuel, road user charges, insurance, etc. Ensure you retain taxable supply information for these expenses. If you're using a logbook, you should complete it for a minimum of 90 days to work out the business use percentage. You can use the result of the logbook to claim for the business share of your vehicle expenses for the next 3 years. After 3 years, or if your business use changes by more than 20%, you'll need to start a new logbook to work out a new business use percentage. If you run your business as a company and your vehicle is registered in the company name, any non-business use is likely to be subject to fringe benefit tax, or FBT. On that basis, you can claim all of the costs for the vehicle and you may not need a logbook, but you will need to keep records of non-business use. GST expenses for motor vehicle are for business-related expenses. You cannot claim expenses related to the private running of your vehicle. Also, if you claim a kilometre rate for vehicle costs for income tax, you can't claim any GST on the kilometre rate. Adjustments can also be made when fixing errors from previous returns. You may occasionally pick up mistakes you've made in past GST returns. You might have forgotten to claim a business expense, or may have missed a payment a customer made to you. There are 3 situations when you'll be able to fix the error in a later GST return. First, if you've forgotten to claim a business expense, you'll generally be able to include it in a return within 2 years of when it was missed. Second, you'll also be able to correct errors of $1,000 or less in your next GST return. Third, if it's not to delay the payment of GST, you'll be able to correct errors that are $10,000 or less and 2% or less of the GST collected in your next tax return. If you owe more GST, then include the GST owed as a debit adjustment. If you're claiming for a missed expense, then include the GST amount as a credit adjustment. For all other errors, you'll need to correct the original return or send us a message in MyIR. We'll need to know what the error was, which return to adjust, and by how much. The last adjustment we'll cover is if you take business stock for personal use. In these situations, you'll need to pay back some of the GST you originally claimed. For example, if a builder buys a load of timber for a job and then takes some home to build a deck, they'll need to pay back the GST on that timber. In this example, they originally claimed GST on all the timber purchased as a business expense and now need to work out the amount of GST on the timber used for their deck at home. The GST for the timber used privately is added as a debit adjustment in their GST return.